evening, viewers, and welcome once again to Export Digest, your #1 program that periscopes the non-oil export sector with a view to highlighting the opportunities therein and appropriate strategies to harness these opportunities while identifying and proffering solutions to the inherent challenges. I am Femi Boyede. You will agree with us that these are really not the best of times for the Nigerian economy, as the nation seems to be confronted with a new challenge every new day, especially since the global crash in the fortunes of crude oil. The recent report of the Statistician General of Nigeria, Dr. Yemi Kale, that confirmed Nigeria's GDP to be in the negative for the first time in several decades seems to have sent jitters down the spines of the country's economic managers. Almost all analysts and commentators on the country's economy are now declaring that finally the country is in economic recession. The reactions have assumed a scary dimension, as recession seems to be perceived as a death knell from which the country can never again recover, or a momentous calamity at a time when the citizens should be celebrating the promised positive change in the nation's economy and their personal living standards.
Like, you take the CBN, for instance, what they were trying to do with those policies, but unfortunately you are trying to achieve a particular result, but in the process you now shot yourself in the foot. That's the way I see it. Because the reason why a lot of those policies came about was because they thought they could there was scarcity of foreign exchange, because the major source of foreign exchange for Nigeria is the crude oil, and we all know what has happened to crude oil prices in the past few months, in the past 18 months, well, we say 12 to 18 months now, when the prices started coming down. And the CBN, in an attempt to ensure that the country has enough foreign exchange to back up our imports, now try to bring in some policies that they felt could assist them to conserve the foreign exchange for what they consider as the relevant sectors, or the more important sectors of the economy. But in the process of doing that, they ended up creating more problems for the economy. There's a major issue that the government and the CBN, they are not taking into consideration. The fact that we had issues with the crude oil price, it was not only crude oil that was affected by the by this drop in prices. It affected all commodities. Do you understand? Including gold. I don't know what the price of gold is now, but if you check the price of gold about 5 years ago, it's completely different from what you have now. It's lower. Now, in the same way, it affected non-oil export as well. All the products that we are doing, the cocoa, the cashew nuts, the ginger, and all these other products were also affected by the downward trend in prices. The way it affected crude oil, right? Now, you now have a situation where the government is restricting the exporters from having access to their funds, from selling, insisting that they must sell their funds to the banks. But at the same time, prices were dropping. So what we experience as exporters is a situation where the prices of goods were dropping in the international market. But we now had a situation where the prices were going up, the local prices were going up in Nigeria.
We also spoke with an economic analyst and former deputy director in the Trade and Exchange Department of the Central Bank of Nigeria.
If the monetary side is setting targets to take the Nigerian financial sector to a 2020 vision, and the government is not interested, or vice versa, if the government is setting that target and the monetary side is not coming on board, we'll have problem. Or even among the executive arm, if the presidency or Ministry of National Planning is thinking of a vision which is not shared by agricultural sector, by the Ministry of Finance, the fiscal side, the manufacturing, the private sector is also not key into it, we'll have a big problem. So, yes, I would say with the new government in place, which is a government of change, we need the Minister of Planning and Budget to come up with a revised vision for the country. And in coming up with a revised vision for the country, everybody must be taken on board. Of course, we only have about 5 years to, or even 4 to year 2020. So it will be very, very meaningless to want to achieve the target we set about 7 or 8 years ago, early in the next 4 years, when we didn't do anything about it. Perhaps we need to set another target of 2025, if not 2030. And this time around, once we bring everybody on board, we'll have milestones for each sector. We'll give responsibilities to each player, and we have monitors. If, again, I were to advise the country, what we need to do now is to compare ourselves with some comparators. And I'll take the example of the BRICS countries, which are referred to today as the breakout nations. They are able to break out from debt pioneers, they are able to break out from poverty to some extent, and they are also able to break out from the things that are holding the economy down, the domestic constraints, and they are also overcoming the international shocks that the countries experience. So, on employment, on poverty index, on the index of doing business, on GDP growth rate, I will advise Nigeria to benchmark Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, the BRICS countries, and set a target of 2025 at the minimum, or 2030 to reach these countries.
Now, as if in sudden realization of the enormity of the problem, and to provide the intervention that the non-oil export sector is in such dire need of, the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, last week in Lagos unveiled the guidelines for accessing the 500 billion naira export stimulation facility that the governor, Godwin Emefiele, had announced at a stakeholder summit on growing Nigeria's non-oil exports sometime in January this year.
We have decided that to stimulate export, the Central Bank of Nigeria itself needs to play its role as a catalyst that will help to stimulate export in Nigeria. Doing this will entail setting aside some funds as intervention funds to support export activity in Nigeria. We are looking at is it RRF? We call it RRF for exports. All these facilities will be given out at no more than 9%. For a start, we are looking at least nothing less than 50 billion naira as a refinancing, rediscounting and refinancing facility for export, while we're also looking at least nothing less than 300 billion naira as export stimulation loans.
On today's episode of Export Digest, we bring excerpts of the one-day event and the reaction of Nigeria's major players in the non-oil export sector. Don't go away.
Bank of Nigeria has approved the following schemes: 500 billion export simulation facility, 2, 50 billion export rediscounting and refinancing facility.
We shall continue to facilitate dialogue, share innovative ideas and fruitful interactions to ensure effective implementation of the facility. I therefore encourage you to actively participate, to make suggestions that are realizable and are practical.
One of the suggestions that I will give is the fact that already, I think, the federal government listed about 13 commodities with which they intend to diversify the economy away from oil. I think, first of all, in tandem with the plan that the government has, they should look at these commodities and, fund these commodities. I'm looking at these funds being properly put together, and you say, okay, this commodity which has been earmarked, let us give so much. For the cashew sector, we want to give so much. For the cocoa sector, we want to give so much, like that. Of course, we can have a balance which will be in the general pool, but the chunk of this money should be done on a sectoral basis so that it can be monitored and it can be effectively used. If we do that, what we discover is that each of these commodities can actually be grown to the extent that it will give us the kind of results that we want. These funds should be, looked at and handled sectorally, and it's not just something that we're just going to put in a pool and then, next thing we just come and give everybody, as they come. No, it should be technically done, working with all the stakeholders. I believe that that is the plan of NEXIM, because they work very hard with Central Bank on this one. And I know that this one will be really, really used to achieve the plan of improving and rekindling the economy. So one of the things I think we should do concerning this fund, as I said, is to take each of the sectors and say, this particular sector we are giving it 20 billion, this one we are giving it 50 billion, and it can be monitored.
So there's no better time to turn to non-oil exports than now. And everything possible should be done to stimulate non-oil exports. That's why this this intervention fund is most welcome. But we've always had there have always been intervention funds, being supervised by different government agencies in the past. And these funds are usually created for laudable and cogent reasons. But our experience shows that most of these funds do not get to the intended beneficiaries. That is the story in all the forums like this that we have attended. Exporters come, they exhibit their products, and the common story is we don't have the money. We cannot access the intervention funds from Central Bank and relevant Yet this is usually so because the conditions set for accessing these facilities are very stringent. You know, very stringent. We are all used to the story of CO, and most farmers and exporters, you know, that is usually the problem. That's usually or one of the big problems. And then also, the central bank is also now realizing that even the banks, the commercial banks, are not interested in accessing these funds for their customers. That is an unfavorable story, which is very worrisome. So even the intervention agencies.
If we do not officially recognize those loans that exist and try to accommodate them, what you might see is that there will be flow between the official and the parallel market. And therefore, it's food for thought. But if it's going to delay the implementation, it can be another window to be created. Also, for the association that I represent, much as it's not known to people outside, we'll probably be bearing the highest brunt. A lot of the time you talk about cocoa, but not much is talked about the existing factories. It's all right to say this is a fresh loan, bringing new operators for any industry for that matter. But don't forget that the existing factories are typically hanging fruits that should be given attention. A lot of them are suffering and also are near bankrupt, if you can imagine, either because the structure of the facilities that they use are incorrect. For instance, if you use a facility of 3 years, 5 years for a factory that is known to exist for an average of 40 years to 50 years, then you're already creating problem ab initio. This is an opportunity to correct those anomalies. And they already have infrastructures on ground. It would take 2-3 years before you set up a new factory. That is not saying don't do new ones, but it's not enough to discourage those who have been in it before for any factory, tomato, cashew, or anything like that. Encourage new ones, but don't shut down the old ones. Do not forget that there are factories that need more or less like a refinancing. Every time we have a bailout for the banks. But when you talk about bailouts for industries, as is done elsewhere, it is an abnormality. And that is a situation that we need to correct with this opportunity on hand.
The other aspect, of course, is the rate, the interest rate. This time, we must say that not all sectors, the interest rate for that sector should be single digits. Okay? Should be single digits. If we really want to diversify the economy, because 25%, 22% cannot give us what we want. So if we have to refinance those existing loans, just like Mr. Owofemi said, we need to refinance, and then we begin to do also with the new ones.
The facility by the guidelines is well designed and is targeted at export-oriented companies. So in the eligibility criteria, we have to make sure that even when you apply, applicants that are not export-oriented will be disqualified. And then there is a monitoring and evaluation mechanism to make sure that even beneficiaries that avail the facility and are not doing export, there are some sanctions for the infraction, because the facility is targeted at the export-oriented sector. And the reason is very simple, because the exporters are crowded out in the credit market, and that's why Central Bank felt that it is necessary to create a window that the export-oriented industry enterprise will have a funding window to make them export, diversify the economy, and be competitive in the international market. There is the eligibility criteria, which will now ensure that you have an export orientation in the business modeling. You have to make sure that you have export offtake contracts for your export product, and you have for startups company that even in their conception, they already have partners for the offtake of the product they are going to produce or process. Export tips. Our education segment comes up immediately after this time out. Tips for success in export trade. Number 1, have a sound quality product. Number 2, do your homework, prepare, do market research, ask for help. Nigeria Export Promotion Council now has export assistance centers in each of the 6 geopolitical zones. Commercial banks have export desks. Fidelity Bank, for example, has a solid SME export support focus. Number 3, don't just be opportunistic. Develop a global strategy. 4, identify markets where your product is needed and where customers can benefit. 5, export is all about relationships. Develop these. People buy from people. 6, be serious about your global commitments. Make a personal investment. Go overseas and sit across from customers and prospects. Number 7, choose your partners and distributors carefully. 8, mitigate risk wherever possible. Get paid in advance. Protect yourself from currency fluctuations. Know that a change in foreign governments can affect your ability to do business. Never forget that nearly 90% of world's exports travel by water. Plan accordingly. Get your documentation, classifications, and permits right. Number 9, use a variety of channels to promote your product. Trade shows, social media, print, trial, and the internet, always in your pocket or on your desk. Number 10, match your best employees to your best markets. Before we round up, let us take the question for the day. Well, that is all we can take this time around on Export Digest. Thank you immensely for joining us. We believe you picked 1 or 2 points today that will sharpen your knowledge of export business in Nigeria. Of course, one of our objectives at Koinonia Ventures Limited, the initiator of Export Digest, is to enlighten and educate you in all ramifications as it concerns non-oil exports. You can watch this particular episode and others before it on our YouTube channel, www.youtube.com/exportdigest. We would also love to hear from you as we work together towards making Nigeria a viable exporting nation. Our channels of communication are open and now showing on your screen. Many thanks to our sponsors for their contributions to the development of Export Digest. Of course, we invite you to also come on board. You can showcase your business, your goods and services on this program. Feel free to come on board by calling us today, and you will have value for your involvement with us. Join us same time on this same channel next week for another interesting package of Export Digest. I am Femi Boyede. See you then, and God bless Nigeria.